Helbrecht is here, and is here to show the other Space Marine Chapter Masters how it's done. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're talking High Marshal Helbrecht, who of course recently crossed the Rubicon Primaris and has got this very new miniature and a new set of rules to boot. In this video we'll be taking a look over his new datasheet, just how much damage he can do to the enemy and weighing him up against a couple of his rivals, then talk a little bit about buffs and synergy that you can use with him and how it might be best to use him in game. In the lore of course, Helbrecht is the current High Marshal of the Black Templars, their equivalent of a chapter master as far as they have one, and perhaps one of his greatest claims to fame was leading the combined might of the Imperial Navy against Ghazghkull Thraka in the Third War of Armageddon. Since then he's repeatedly clashed with Imhotep the Stormlord of the Necrons, and is currently off on crusade defending the Ecclesiarchy's worlds against the great rift of chaos that opened up in the fall of Cadia. Let's see what he and the Sword of the High Marshals can do on the tabletop then. So in game, High Marshal Helbrecht is an 160 point HQ choice for the forces of the Black Templars. He's an infantry primaris character and he has the chapter master keyword. 160 points is fairly pricey for a marine character, though for that you do get a fairly impressive stat line. Notably he has a mighty 8 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 9 and a 2+ armor save, of course backed up by his Iron Halo for a 4+ invul. It means that you're going to need a lot of damage to take him down, and 6 attacks means 7 with shock assault normally, which is pretty impressive given his combat profile. Wargear wise, Helbrecht is armed with Ferocity, his relic combi melter. That one, like him, also seems to have been primarised up a bit. The bolter parts become truly ferocious, 30-inch range, rapid fire 2, strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1. Particularly within 15 inches, that's going to put out a lot of hurt on infantry. And the melter gun part of it is a nice simple strength 8, AP -4 and damage d6 +2. Most notably, you don't have to worry about getting within melter range to get the extra damage for it. It just has the nice amplified d6 +2 damage profile, regardless of whether you're in 6-inch range or not. Of course his shooting's not really the main bit, but it's certainly a nice to have as he's getting to grips with the foe. If he gets lucky with a surprise melter gun shot, he could certainly end a fight before he even gets into combat. Talking of which though, that really is where his real value lies. His Sword of the High Marshals has a dual profile. If you're fighting hordes then you'd use it one-handed. He'd be strength 6, AP -3 and damage 1, but get double the attacks. That means that he's going to be handing out a happy 14 attacks to luckless enemies around him, and strength 6 really is quite a nice breakpoint where you're wounding any toughness 3 infantry on 2s. That should usually be somewhere between 8 and 10 toughness 3 models if he's fighting them. If you're engaged with a foe that's worthy of him though, then you'd want to be using the two-handed attack, strength ×2, so usually strength 8, AP -3 and flat damage 3. Essentially the same as a Thunderhammer, but with more AP and no negative to hit. That's really good stuff with so many attacks. It'll be truly brutal against 3 wound infantry, and against say a fairly standard toughness 7 vehicle target, that'll average you around about 9 wounds. If he gets a bit lucky or you spend a command reroll, definitely a good chance of turning over a lot of battle tanks in a single turn. Finally, he also gets a couple of small melee attacks with his attendant Thrall's Fists, a couple of extra attacks at strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. I guess that's a reasonable chance of killing another toughness 3 model with a bad save. I guess that doesn't hurt. And then frag or crack grenades, though they're kind of redundant when you've got Ferocity to shoot instead. Overall, combat wise, it's a pretty tanky and pretty dangerous model. Decently survivable and incredibly dangerous. Finally, for his special rules and buffing abilities, of course there's more good news there. As a chapter master, he can give one core or character unit 4 rerolls to hit. That could be seriously tasty on things like the big Crusader squads, or things like Thunderhammer and Stormshield Terminators. He has his standard captain-like aura of reroll 1s to hit. And then finally he does have one really quite fun special rule called Crusade of Wrath, where basically any Black Templar core units within 6 inches of him get to add 1 to their strength when they're making melee attacks. In combination with his rerolls, this makes him really quite a nice buffing character. Not bad on top of how strong he is in combat already, though I think it does mean that his buffs are far better on some units than others. I think in particular it's great on anything that's strength 4, as it'll get you to strength 5, wounding things like Gravis Marines on 4s, or standard sized Space Marines on 3s. Finally, you can very much make Helbrecht your Warlord. I'd say he has one of the better traits out of the Black Templar Warlord trait options. Frontline Commander gives him +1 to advance and charge, and if you charge him into the enemy first, then core units will also get +1 to charge any units that he's engaged with. I guess it's helpful enough, maybe more helpful on him than some other places, as he really doesn't want to avoid getting mixed up in melee. That's something that he very much wants to do anyway. Overall, he's certainly a fair bit more of an investment than some Space Marine characters, but has a combat punch that can't really be ignored by virtually anyone he tangles with, or decently buff the Crusaders he's charging alongside, and even has a little bit of quality shooting to chip in as well. I thought it might be kind of fun to compare him to the other chapter masters within Codex Space Marines, and to be honest I think he does stack up fairly favourably. For your 160 points, Helbrecht could go through around about 10 Guardsmen, 4 Marines, 3 Gravis Marines, or do about 9 or 10 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle on average. Calgar of the Ultramarines just really can't compete for damage output, being significantly worse in every category as you can see, but admittedly he is far tougher than Helbrecht with that Armour of Heracles halving damage, and I guess he grants a few more CP. Still though, he does cost a massive amount more at 50 points more than Helbrecht. Out of the Codex Space Marines chapter masters, Logan Grimnar is the only one who can get close. I'm afraid Dante and Azrael just really aren't going to cut it numbers wise, as the damage characteristic on their weapons is less than 3. Grimnar is just a tiny bit behind Helbrecht. Their combat profiles are quite similar, though Logan's typically going to have one less attack, as he hasn't got round to making himself into a Primaris Marine yet. If he does manage to get into the Assault Doctrine, he might be able to equal Helbrecht's numbers then, though I guess if you're doing that, Helbrecht could have his Templar vows along and still win. For the record, this is comparing him to Logan Grimnar on foot, not on his Storm Rider sleigh, as that does make him into a bit of a different unit and one that can be shot directly by the enemy, and I still think that Helbrecht is looking better than Grimnar just overall. He doesn't get that +1 to strength aura that Helbrecht has, and his shooting isn't as good either. As a named character, he maybe isn't the most flexible in terms of buffs or synergies. Probably the biggest decision is which units to run alongside him into battle. He might be able to make some reasonable use out of some of the Templar vows though. The one with the 5+ invul save won't do him any good for the save, but it will be good for the mini transhuman physiology. The one where he can only be wounded on a 3+ or worse. Auto wounds on 6s or permanently being in Assault Doctrine might help, though those ones do come with some significant downsides. The one that messes with which units you can charge isn't exactly great if you're trying to charge in alongside a squad and the enemy's got multiple targets available. I think Helbrecht might well be commonly paired with Grimoldus. Both of them seem pretty fantastic buffing units for the squads that they can support. Grimoldus puts out 2 reliable litanies and a 6+ feel no pain buff, and that doesn't really overlap too much with what Helbrecht does, his rerolls and his +1 strength. Grimoldus could potentially use Divine Protection on Helbrecht if he really wanted to keep him safe for a turn, give him a 5+ feel no pain, and even if he didn't, he might still benefit from that Servitor that would give out a 6+ feel no pain. I feel like Black Templar players might use Apothecaries a little bit less, partly due to the overlap that the Feel No Pain buff has with Grimoldus, but if you do have one around, healing a bunch more wounds onto Helbrecht each turn could be worse. Otherwise, for getting him up the board, you could think about an Impulsor perhaps. They are pretty pricey, but when you have an 160 point character, there's at least a better ratio between the cost of the transport and the cost of its contents. Impulsors aren't too bad if you are taking that 5+ invul litany. It means that you can skimp on the shield dome, though I guess the main downside is that you're not going to be using the Chapter Master rerolls if you're there, as they happen in the command phase before you get out. Otherwise, for stratagems, transhuman physiology still might well be worth it. Being wounded on 4s is better than being wounded on 3s, and if you can ever spend 2 command points to interrupt or fights in death, I think usually the damage output of 1 combat phase with him is going to be enough to justify that investment. Otherwise, you can certainly do other normal Templar things, Devout Push, or maybe for the Emperor's Honour if you want to try and force one enemy unit to attack nothing but him. Maybe it could be good if you think that he's going to die anyway, at least that way he might be able to keep whatever's around him alive. So if we were to include Helbrecht in the Black Templars army list, I think the main aim would be to make good use of both his damage in melee and also his buffs. I'd personally not go for a transport to make good use of those Chapter Master rerolls each turn. Put him in the core of your army next to probably at least 2 different melee squads, and start moving towards an important midfield objective. As for which melee unit, I think he's got really quite a lot of options to choose from. Blade Guard Veterans and Assault Terminators are both incredibly dangerous, and with those Storm Shields they have a very good chance of weathering the enemy fire. Crusader squads synergize with him really well, maybe in the 5+ invul save vow, and they're just going to be so much more threatening in combat if they're rerolling all hit rolls and strength 5 with those chainswords. Sword Brethren could be an interesting option. They might be just a tiny bit more fragile for their points cost compared with Blade Guard Veterans though. I'm not sure how many people we're going to see running them on foot in preference to things like Blade Guard or Crusader squads. And I guess Vanguard Veterans, if they were in range of his buffs, would be very nice, but if you're using jump packs, which are usually a great deal, they might have a bit of a tendency to leave him behind. I suppose you could still use his Chapter Master buffs as a bit of a missile though, hand them out in the command phase, and then they can go off and charge what they want in the charge phase. If you're bringing some Black Templar fire support along, having something like a Dreadnought around as well isn't the worst idea, I think. For the first turn, when his command rerolls aren't going to be very useful for anything in combat, you may as well throw that on something like a Redemptor Dreadnought, just to get a serious amount of first turn firepower. From there, it'd be wanting to head towards the midfield objectives, somewhere the opponent is likely to clear you off, and ideally I think he's going to want to get stuck into elite infantry and light vehicles, things with 2 or 3 wounds where his flat 3 damage will come in handy, and probably toughness 7 vehicles if possible to wound them on 3s. Being able to hand out 14 strength 6 attacks though will mean he'll chew through hordes very nicely as well. I guess the main competitors for that sort of role might be a cheap captain or lieutenant. They won't fight as hard as them for the points, but they will cost significantly less, and he could take something useful like Rites of War if he wanted to run alongside some Blade Guard or Assault Terminators and make them OBSEC. And there's at least a bit of competition for the HQ slots with the Emperor's Champion and Grimoldus. You're only going to want so many characters, and it means that you might well not be able to take everything that you want to, so something's usually got to give. In any case though, I certainly think it's a very strong miniature indeed. It's already made an appearance in the first Black Templar list to win a grand tournament post-Codex, so that's certainly good news for implying that he's a competitive model. I think it's going to be a fun model to use on the table as well, particularly whenever he gets to charge something. So let me know what you think of High Marshal Helbrecht down in the comments below. Does he make the cut in your list if you're theory crafting with some Black Templars, or would you prefer other things? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, new ones coming out just about every day, and hopefully we'll have a few more for the Black Templars. I want to go over their sword brethren at some point. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. The Patreon is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so often, and if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.